Yeah, I think we'll just get kicked off. Obviously, there'll be a flow of people kind of coming through afterwards, but yeah, we'll just get straight into it. Well, yeah, firstly, thank you to everyone who's obviously taken time out of their Thursday evening to attend the State of Frontend webinar. I know obviously Dillon's got some great content planned and prepped for you guys, so notepads at the ready. Yeah, again, secondly, it has obviously been great to partner up with Dillon on this. Obviously, Dillon, I think you've been in development over about 5 years now, isn't that right?
Yeah. 5 years commercial, kind of a few years before that, doing my own things.
Cool. So yeah, I know Dillon's actually, reason I reached out to him and noticed, well, he recently just joined with IHS Markets, obviously really, really good company, lead UI architect. Obviously he was brought on there to, well, he's been brought on to lead a number of the engineers across 6 agile teams. So I think it's deliver a new large scale platform for a huge household name in the health industry. So naturally has a wealth of knowledge and information to share with you guys. Any developer can learn from, whether you're starting at the entry level or you're also at that lead level, just looking to sharpen your tools. Good guy to, yeah, good person to pick his brain. Again, just kind of getting to know you, Dillon, over the past kind of month and a bit as well. It's good to see that you actually enjoy doing the tech talks. Obviously, I think you mentioned it's your way of giving back to the community, and again, yeah, it is obviously fun. It's interactive, and yeah, it's at the same time, yeah, obviously, I'm sure you've listened into a few of your time, so it's a great way to obviously, like I say, give back to everybody else. So, like Peter mentioned in the chat, if you guys have any questions, do pop them through to the Q&A section at the bottom. I believe if somebody asks a question, instead of you asking the same one, you can like it, and it will then be prompted to the top of it, which obviously saves a lot of kind of time and hassle. So yeah, without further delay, I'll like to introduce Dillon Erhardt to jump straight into it. Mate, welcome. Thanks for taking time out and doing it.
No worries. Thank you.
No problem.
Name's definitely quite hard to pronounce. Yeah. So my talk today is basically state of front end. Kind of a play on words. The talk will pretty much be about how we manage state on the front end in modern applications. Before we get to that, a bit about me. My name's Dillon Erhardt. Hard to pronounce, hard to spell, but my details. I just can't see my screen. It's behind this one. Should be down the bottom. That's my Twitter. That's my website. I'm pretty active on both of those, so feel free to contact me about anything. I like answering questions. Bit of my background: self-taught developer. I did have on my CV for a little while that I went to University of YouTube, because that's how I learned. Spent maybe 2-3 years when I was at school learning by just watching videos and repeating it, and somehow ended up with a career in development. More recently than that, my last role was at Cognizant, massive technology business with a lot of big clients. I was working as tech lead on the digital pharmacy services project for Boots, which was really interesting. Great team to work with, some great technology as well. And now senior UI architect at IHS Market. I've come in to help with a replatforming bit of work, taking what was a very legacy application and moving it to the cloud, which brings really interesting challenges and really, really cool tech. Most of my work at the moment is kind of getting a plan in place for how we create a unified customer experience across all the products. Let's move on. What I'm actually going to talk about today. Like I said, managing state in modern front-end applications, and as well as the actual tech side of it, how those decisions can affect and impact the development of your project. To start with, we need to know what types of state we have in our application. A normal web application used to be, you have a server, the client makes a request, gets an HTML document back, and displays it on the web page. Everything was done through requests like that. Nowadays, it's way different. As most developers will know, you're not doing just get and post requests with basic forms and basic text content. You've got full, rich, interactive web applications, and most of them are built with technologies like React, Vue, Angular, those kind of single page application frameworks, as you would probably call them. The problem comes with this when we move towards that single page application model. Developers on the front end have to also start thinking about the state of the application. The state that would usually be just what comes from the database or in memory on the server. The problem I see a lot of the time is that when developers are creating, say we're creating a web application that allows you to just do CRUD operations on some resources, say a blog post. We have the front end, which needs to display the editor, display the actual content, have authorization, login, everything like that. We tend to get nowadays, the developers will implement a lot of that state on the front end. And that causes a bit of a fracture between the back end and the front end. I'll get more into that in a bit, but if we look at first the different types of state that we have in a normal application. UI state. So this is the bit that JavaScript developers, front-end developers should be most concerned about. This is anything that happens on the front end and anything you need to display and keep a kind of track of. Second would be navigation state. This is just where you are in the application. And third, business state, for the lack of a better sort of name, because this can include so many different things and really varies depending on what type of application you're building. Going into these a bit deeper, UI state can be things like form, data fetching, layout. So when your user puts something into a form, you want to keep track of what those values are. In React, we'd probably call that a controlled field, a controlled input. We also have, when we're doing data fetching, things like the loading state, the error, any errors, have we done an initial fetch? Do we want to refetch? That kind of thing. Mostly this will live on the client. Navigation state, like we said, it's just where the user is in the application. Pretty much lives in the URL bar. Slight simplification because we can store other state here and keep it in different places, but usually this is, everyone knows that you go to /users and that's going to give you likely the users page. We think of it as resources really. Business state. This is the more complicated one. I'm just trying to keep my notes up to date with what slide I'm on. For most applications, this will make up the majority of your state. And because it's most of your state, this is where most of the issues happen. This type of state generally lives on the back end, but that's a bit of a generalization as well. And we'll get to that generalization later. Exceptions would be sometimes that business state you don't just want to have on the server. So it's not just what's in your database, which is your normally thought of as the state, the business state. Some examples of this might be an application with heavy front-end logic. Think about Figma. A lot of you have probably used Figma. That one, it's like Photoshop. You've got the state of the actual the canvas and all those kind of things. It'd be really bad performance to every request you're doing to edit that state, to go over the network and update a database and do all that. The application just would run way too slowly to do anything. Same with offline first applications. If we're offline and we want it still to work, we can't send stuff over the wire. It just doesn't work like that. Games, same, rely on that performance, speed. We don't want to be crossing that heavy network call. Some of the ways that sometimes we actually will keep some of this on the server as well. It gets a little bit complicated, but generally speaking, for most applications, you will want to keep your business state on the server. With these types of applications, we can also sync it using like intermittent syncing. So every couple of seconds we might sync the state, or might give the user the ability to click a sync button, which will do it automatically. Next slide. State management solutions and their problems. So this is like where we see the problems with the different types of state in current applications. So a few of the ones that I've worked on, it tends to be a front-end application that has Redux. I'm just taking Redux because that's the biggest, most popular one that I see, and it has a lot of implementations for different frameworks. Angular kind of uses it, React, Redux uses it. They have that as the centralized state management, and all of your state goes into that Redux store. Usually, when I was learning, that was definitely seen as a good thing, because I don't want to have multiple sources of truth for my state. I want it all to be in one place, which is true. But the problem with it is that having it all in that one place causes developers to get very confused, and rightly so, because it does end up really confusing. That they'll get confused that their business state, their client, their UI state, and even navigation state is all in that same store. In a few applications I've worked in, everything gets put into that Redux store, and then we're just updating the server as a side effect, which is completely against how it should be. We don't want the front end to be the main source of truth and then trying to have the server and back end catch up. We want the back end to be where it's persisted, and where we ultimately, if the front end gets slightly out of sync, we want it to sync back up to that back end one. We can't do that if the front end is being used as the source of truth. The problem with Redux as well, and a lot of the state management solutions, is that although we want to keep it in the same place, people think of it as using the same sort of logic and same things like the reducers and actions to handle all state, which just adds to that confusing. If you tell a developer, I don't know how many of you worked in React, but if you have React Redux and you tell a developer that they need to toggle this menu item on and off, we can do that through Redux. Just have an action that's dispatched, which sets the state for that menu item to be open in Redux, and the same for closed. And that is done exactly the same way as if I was saving a form and adding that user that I've just created or resource I've just created into Redux. It uses that same action, and then we have to use funcs to update it on the server, and then we get We have to track the status of those calls that we did in the thunks, and then those have to update the UI state as well. So if it fails, we've got to tell it that it needs to show an error, clear the data we've already put in there, possibly clear the form, or prompt the user to redo it. The problem with this in the wider development cycle, so when you're building an application as a project in an organization, is as we develop this state model and we create a front end that is holding all the state and a back end that's out of sync, or certain bits of state in the front end, it causes us to have a number of issues outside of the actual development. So story splitting, when we tried to decide what teams are going to work on which bit of the story, or how we're going to develop it. So instead of doing a vertical slice and working on the back end and the front end at the same time, it can force us to have to work on the back end first and then the front end second, or the other way around, which is even more has even more issues. Architecture decisions. So one application I worked on, the front end developers were storing everything in that Redux store. Then it meant that the back end application had to be able to kind of take those requests and was then sending data back to the front end as a sort. So the backends were coming stateless and not even in the database, and then sending all whatever data back to the front end, which was holding the state. And then that would eventually, after the long process of doing that multiple times, save the data that was stored on the front end all at once to the back end. This obviously meant that if something failed on that last save, you had to do some complicated logic to bring them back to a start, to redo it, or try and retry a load of times. Instead of, if we had been just saving the state to the back end along the way, we would have just been able to save it on each call, and then on the last call say it's done, that's set, it's completed, whatever. If that failed, it's just one small call that's redoing, not having to worry about managing the whole state again. Team structure. Doing this can really push you towards having front end and back end teams, which is not the best way to do it. Well, in my opinion, I know some teams do this, but I think really for mature organizations, you should be going with vertical slices where teams own a full feature themselves. Testing as well. It adds such complexity to testing. Definitely if you've got to test all of those edge cases that we get with that syncing the data back up between the front end state and the back end state. How can you solve this? Tooling is key. Make your developers' lives easier. That's basically it. You can use Redux for this. Redux is an amazing solution. I've talked closely with Dan Abramath, Mark Erickson, who maintains the Redux docs and created React Redux. Amazing tool, but it's too flexible. So it allows you to store every type of state in there, mutate state-ish, change your state, read from it, do all of that. The problem is that it allows for you to put everything in one place and leaves too much up to the developer. There's a really good Twitter thread that me, Mark, and Tanner Lindsley had. He's the creator of React Query, about why people are preferring React Query over Redux, even though you can do the exact same thing in both. the reason is that I think is that React Query is just so much easier. No developers don't have to care about how you manage the state. All they want to do is say, right, get me this data from this URL and cache it locally, basically. And if I want to clear it, refetch it, mutate it, really clean, nice API to do it. And it provides you the UI state straight out the box. So when you do a fetch, it gives you the loading, it gives you the error, it gives you that is fetching, has finished, all that kind of stuff, which is awesome. It stops the developer having to worry about that type of state and stops them having to come up with the massive Redux implementation of here's an action for get users, here's an action for get user success, get users error, clear, get users, all that kind of stuff. That's the end. That's, if anyone got any questions, it'll probably be easier to answer questions about it.
Yeah, if anybody has any questions, like we mentioned previously, if you pop them in the Q&A section at the bottom, yeah, obviously I'm sure, like I said, Dillon will be able to, yeah, be able to answer them. Yeah, now for you guys. So if there are one or two things, feel free just to pop them in. We'll give you guys a couple of minutes.
Yeah. It's very hard to kind of condense the whole topic into a few minutes. I was trying to figure out the best forum for kind of demonstrating it without actually bringing up a code editor and running through some code.
Okay. Yeah, I think the Vinayak, I don't know if it was a question or not. He just mentioned Redux first React context API. Got a couple of likes.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. I've had this conversation with a few people in my previous organization. It depends. Depends on what your project is, and it depends on your developers. Really, and in the good, if you've got a big organization, I would say get some people that know how to handle, know how to work with state properly and write abstractions over it. Don't have Redux, don't let your developers work straight with Redux, and don't let them work straight with Context API. Both are great, and both will do what you need. There is differences kind of on like performance, because some of the, like Redux provides you with proper subscriptions and things like that. But really, just pick which one works for your application, build some abstraction around it. If you're in React, which I would assume you are, if you've got Context API, create a hook and just have your developers use that hook. Have those hooks created in a way that lets you abstract that actual state manipulation. So say you're doing that one, we'll go back to the one of creating users like we did before. You can create a Redux resource for users, put all of it in, all of the state you need in there. So the UI state for loading and things like that, expose that through the hook. But then don't have your updates to that state be the priority. Have the actual update to the backend API be the priority. If you're talking about Redux, I'd actually suggest not using Redux thunks unless you really understand how to use that properly, because you'd be better off setting it up. Kind of what React Context API will force you to do is creating calls that then you have to wait until they finish to then dispatch an action to your Redux store. But I'd still say go with Redux.
Cool. I believe, yeah, it's Tamur Khan. Obviously, hi Dillon. Great talk, very informative. How about if we keep state back and forth via React.js? I'm guessing that's Redux, event-driven state management across both ends. Yeah.
So RxJS is Angular's kind of implementation, even though you can actually use it for React. Event-driven state management, I wouldn't want to really keep any like business state in the front end. And what you want the front end to be is sort of a cache. So when you fetch some data, you're going to put it into your RxJS will do this. You'll put it into that store and then read it out of there. But that store shouldn't be like the centralized place. Like if you're doing adding a new item to a list, you shouldn't be adding it as priority to that item in the store. You shouldn't have to even worry about doing that at all. This is one thing that React Query actually forces you to do quite well, is what you'll do is create that request that will add it to the database, and then it will you can force it to invalidate the cache, which will do another get request to pull the whole thing. So it's kind of resyncing it on every time. Obviously on a big application, that's not very performant. So you're going to want to do that manipulation yourself, but just make sure that when you do that manipulation, you've actually confirmed that it's happened and been added properly to the back end. Don't just fire and forget. There was a good talk by Guillermo Rauch, who created Next.js and CEO of Vercel, about this, the kind of concept of optimistic UI. So when you add something to a list, you don't want to always wait for that that item to be added to the database. You might want to show it straight away because you know it's going to eventually be added, and you want it to be quick feedback for the user. I'd suggest for something like that in like RxJS is actually have a second like array in the store. So have your array that's got the items, and then have another array for appending items or something like that, that you can add that to, and it'll keep it in there. And then it's separate to the other one. So you can then, it forces you to kind of clear out that array once you know for a fact that it is being persisted properly.
Cool. Yeah, hopefully that answered the question. I know Vinayak had another one there. Yeah, can you see? I'm assuming you can see them, right?
Yeah, I can see them. Yeah.
Cool.
So best practices for React in general, how to structure complex projects and making SEO friendly. For React, look at Next.js. There's a load of solutions like that, Gatsby, and if you're in Vue, like Nux and things like that. But look at Next.js. To me, it is the future of React for the web, and it's something that's got massive traction already. A load of companies are using it. It'll give you a really nice way to create your different pages, allow them to be server-side rendered, but not just server-side rendered. You can set it up to do server-side generation. So at build time, it will go through and generate all the pages and just put them onto a CDN. So they're really fast and snappy. But it also gives you a really simple API to be able to make that single page be created as a like serverless function. So it'll still be able to be generated on the server if you need it. Most of the time, I personally never really need that. There's not often that I want to have content that's cached and going to be read by search engines that needs to be server-side generated all the time. But if there is, it allows you to do that quite nicely.
Cool.
versus Angular.
Um,
hope no one from my organization's on here because we use Angular, but I'd definitely say React. I think Angular it's nice, but it puts way too much boilerplate. It's not reactive, so it makes you force you to write way more code. And with React hooks as well, it's so easy to just compose code on top of each other, which you just can't do with Angular JS. Although I think for a bigger organization, Angular still has a better and more defined structure that forces teams to work in the right way. I don't see as many of these state issues actually with Angular. Next.js or Gatsby. Next.js. Gatsby is great as a server-side, not server-side, like pre-generated framework. So it lets you go through and generate all your pages before you even deploy it. And it's just reading them off a CDN. The same as Next does, but Next just also has a really nice way to use it like a normal application as well, with server-side rendering. And it's just got a load more features. Like Next team is working with the Chrome team to optimize it even more for Chrome. They're literally rewriting some of the JavaScript engine to kind of be more compatible in a way. They just had Next just had the NextConf. Definitely go on their YouTube, the Vercel channel, and check out some of those videos. They're really cool.
Cool, nice. Got the last two. Well, if there's any others coming through after, yeah, great. But yeah, Mike has one there as well.
Great question, actually. Yeah, so this is something that I'm really focused on at work at the moment. We've got a micro front end framework that we've kind of created ourselves in Angular, and I'm looking at how we can expand that to work across multiple technologies and multiple products. It's a really interesting concept, and there's loads to do on it. Hopefully I'm going to come up with a nice solution that I can talk about in the future. But in terms of this problem, I don't think it really affects it too much, because you're still going to have that same issue with having your state on the front end. The only thing I think it does kind of force you to do is abstract some of your shared concerns like authentication, kind of state management, all that kind of thing, into its own APIs. So if there's something you want to share across multiple front ends, you have to pull it out and have to create a specific API for it, which is kind of the solution that I'm suggesting for this problem anyway. Svelte. Yeah, I've heard of it, seen a lot about it. I've played around with it a tiny bit, but not really felt the need to jump too much into it. I think it's nice and is great for things like small applications where instead of using like jQuery or something, it's like getting the benefit of React for those applications. But for a full modern like interactive front end application, I think it's just doesn't have enough benefits compared to over React to really justify the switch to a new community, because React has such a ecosystem around it already.
Cool. That is all the questions. Yeah. Well, yeah. Firstly, yeah, Dillon, thanks. Obviously, huge thanks, mate, for running that. Obviously, I hope the content to everybody out there was obviously worthwhile. Yeah, like I said, again, obviously huge thanks for actually creating the content firstly, and taking the time out to actually educate us all. A lot of it kind of goes over my head, but
Mine too, it's fine.
I'm sure for like a lot of you guys, it definitely was worthwhile. And again, obviously, just want to say a massive thanks. Obviously, you guys listening on a Thursday evening. Yeah, again, obviously picking Dillon's brain with some of them questions, it is good. And again, last but not least, obviously Beth, obviously the marketing manager behind all this, for obviously putting it together from the digital art kind of right through to the schedule and actually organizing everything. So yeah, obviously I'll give you guys a virtual clap on that one. So no, thanks again, really appreciate it. But yeah, we will be obviously putting out a white paper. I think it usually comes a couple of days after. I had a couple of people just message me on LinkedIn whilst we were on there, asking, just explain they couldn't make it, but they asked, is there going to be a video? So there will be a video on YouTube in the next couple of days. So once we get that, I'll pop it out to you guys if you need it. And yeah, thanks again, everybody. Apart from that, I'm going to grab a beer and have just a good evening. So thanks again, Dillon.
Just a note that if anyone wants to see the slides, they're on sof.dillonerhart.com. So you can access them.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll attach you to the white paper as well, mate. That would be brilliant. Yeah, thanks for that, Dillon. Cool. All right, have a great evening, everybody, and thanks again.
Thank you.
See you later. Bye-bye.
Bye.